Welcome to this VBA mini project where I'm going to show you how to make a VBA alert system. Specifically, it's going to allow you to track cells within the workbook regardless of where they are, and then see if they have changed from their previous value. You can also track if they've gone up by, let's say, 10% or down 10% or above or below a certain threshold. Whatever you want to track, I'm going to show you a great system for doing that. And this implementation works like this. Let's change the cell right here to 5. I hit enter, and we get an alert that says which cells were changed. So what worksheet, what cell on that worksheet, the previous value, and then what the new value is. And we're going to manage which cells to track in the worksheet. So when I hit OK, we can go to the value tracker. If you want to track a new cell, you add it right here. You don't even have to go into the VBA code window. So once you have this guy set up, it's going to be great. And you don't just have to show the user an alert pop-up like I just showed you. You can have an email automatically sent out to a manager. Let's say there's a problem. The value has gone up 200% and it's an emergency, so an email gets automatically sent out, or it does whatever else you want it to do. It's a pretty versatile little system, and it's going to be a lot easier to manage than some of the other ways I've shown you how to do this. Specifically, if you know about this issue, if we have a linked cell like this guy right here, if this cell changes, the normal way to track it simply wouldn't work. We have to kind of jump through a few hoops. So here we are going to make life much, much easier. If you want to download the file in this tutorial, you can go to teachexcel.com and do that. I'll have a link to it in the description of this video. And if you want to learn how to expand this guy to do so much more, check out my full VBA course on teachexcel.com, link in the description. Now let me reset this workbook and let's build it from scratch, or almost scratch. All right, now I have cleared out everything that makes this guy work, but I left in these 3 initial tabs with all the data because it's not that much. So let me just go through it and show you how the setup is. Assume you have lots and lots of data. I've simplified what we see here because it'll be easier to follow. So here I simply have a cell that has a value in it, nothing special, but we link a few other cells to it. So we go to data 1, and we have right here just another regular number, but right here we have one that's linked to the dashboard and the cell above it right here. So when I change the dashboard, this guy will change. And on data 2, we have a value to monitor right here, just the same value as on the dashboard, so a linked cell, which makes it a little bit more interesting to track when it changes. Now let's go to the value tracker. This is an interesting worksheet and a thing that's going to allow you to much more easily track how your cells have changed and if you want to do something based off of that. So what we're going to do here is to have a very basic table. It's going to contain the worksheet where the cell that we want to track is located, the cell on that worksheet, so its actual range, A1, B1, whatever you want to put there. And then we're going to have 2 cells, one that stores the previous value and one that stores the current value. Then we're going to run a macro that will check this table to see if these values are equal or not. If they are not equal, then we're going to do something. In this case, give the user an alert message. And we're going to manage this cell with a simple formula, and this cell is going to be updated in the backend code. So let's set this guy up first. I'm going to click in here and hit Control T, or go to Insert Table and check my table has headers. Okay. So I want to check 2 cells on the Data 1 worksheet. So let's type Data 1, hit Enter, Data 1 again, and let's go here. We want B3 and B4. So I go over here and type B3 and B4, and let's go for data 2. This is so much easier to manage everything in the worksheet. Data 2 F9, okay, F9. And by the way, you can completely hide this worksheet at the end of everything if you want so that the end user never ever has to see it. And if you want to make things really cool, you can even put a little button on the dashboard that when clicked will have a little password prompt and say enter password to view the admin interface or to change the values that you track. And then when they enter the correct password, it shows you this tab. There are so many wonderful things you can do, but I'm going to try and stay on topic here. So we have our worksheets and our cells. Now let's build a little formula over here that's going to get the current value. And what we want to do is to use these two guys to build that formula. Now what we're going to do here to make our life much easier is go to the right and hit equals, go to data 1 worksheet and click the cell that we care about and hit enter. And then we can double click it and see the exact format that we want for our formula. So we want to build this right here using these two cells, and we put it inside the indirect function and it makes everything work. So we go right here, equals indirect, and let's do double quote, single quote, double quote, space, ampersand, and I want the worksheet, space, ampersand, double quote, single quote, or apostrophe, and this time we want an exclamation point, then close it up, space, ampersand, space, and cell. Hit enter, and there we go. 275, and let's verify everything. 2, 7, and 5. Perfect. We are almost done out here, but one thing I want you to get used to doing is to rename your tables. It'll make your code much easier to read. So click in here and go to Table Design, and up here let's type TBL, and how about this time Cell Value Tracker. Enter. And now it's time to go to the VBA window. So hit Alt F11. And what we want to do this time is to double click this workbook. And then go up here to the upper left and click Workbook. It's going to have some default code here. The code that you put right in here would run when the workbook opens. You can do a lot of great things with that, but we're not going to be doing that here. What we want is click this guy and go to Sheet Change. This is the event that we care about. And let's give it some more spacing. And now anytime we change any cell in the worksheet, whatever we have here is going to run. And we get two lovely values supplied to us, the sheet upon which a change has been made, and the range or the cell where that change was made. Let's go ahead and start the programming. And before I actually do the coding, I want to say that when you do a project like this, go ahead and make a bunch of notes up here. And what I want you to put in your notes is an outline of how you want to go about this process, whatever you're trying to do. What I did here is I made about 3, I think, different sections of notes for different ways to achieve the same result. And then I went with the one that seemed easiest to me given what I'm trying to do. And you want to go ahead and write these notes out because there are so many different ways to do things that sometimes what'll happen is when you get 3/4 of the way into your programming, into making your macro, your procedure, you realize, wait a second, this would have been a lot easier if I had done it a different way and just planned things out. But I have already planned everything out, and what we're going to do is what I already told you in the worksheet. Compare the values in the table and output a message. For that, we need a few variables. Let's get a variable for the tracker worksheet, the one with the values on it that we want to compare. WS tracker as worksheet. And let's go for one to go through the table, RNG cur row for current row, and we're going to make that a range. And let's make life easy to make a nice little VBA output message and create 2 variables. Message box output as string, one to hold all of the output, and message box output prefix as a string. This is going to hold the prefix. And the next thing that we want to do is to turn off events. So enable events equals false. And then at the very end of this guy, all the way down here, let's go ahead and turn it back on. Now, what is an event? An event is a chunk of code that's going to run when the user does something. This is an event. If we do not turn events off right here, and then we have code here that's going to cause another event to trigger or run, such as changing the value of a cell, such as saving the previous value of a cell, we could end up in an endless loop, or at least a loop that's going to run a lot more than we want. So we kill the events up here, and we bring them back to life down here. And if you have an error handler, go ahead and put this guy in your error handler so it's always turned back on. Otherwise, your workbook will not work correctly. Now let's go ahead and make the worksheet set, or the worksheet reference. Set WS tracker equal to worksheets value tracker. All right, and now let's go ahead and set up the message box output, because what we're about to have after that is a loop that's going to go through the table. And in that loop, we're going to build some output for the message box. But I want to have a nice little thing before we get to that output in the message box. So I want my message box output prefix, the thing that's going to come first, to say changed values. And let's go ampersand VB new line to get a new line in there, and VB new line again. And let's go ahead and start to build the message box output. All we're going to do here is to set it to the prefix. So message box output prefix. And you'll see why I split these two things up once we get to the end. But now let us go ahead and loop through the table. So what we're going to do is to get this reference, loop through the table, and compare these two guys. Now this is where you have a lot of flexibility, because this column does not have to store the previous value. Or you could have additional columns. You could have another column, 2 columns, 10 columns, and each column can have a different thing in it that you store, and you compare that thing to the current value of the cell. And then you can track all types of different outcomes. In one macro, you can track if it's gone up 10% or 50% or 100%. You want to do 10 different things. Or it's gone negative. Oh my gosh, send an email to the manager. The world's coming to an end. Add more columns here, and it's going to allow you to manage that with relative ease. Now, let us Alt F11 back to the code window, and let us get this loop started. So I want to go through the table. Let's go ahead and build a nice little for each loop. For each RNG cur row, that's going to store the range reference for every row. In, and we want to reference the table. What do we need to do to reference a table? Well, we first go to it's a worksheet WS tracker. Then what is a table? It's a list object. And what's the name of our table? TBL, cell of value tracker. And when you do this in reality, when you're programming, go ahead and copy and paste this value in there so that you don't misspell it. Misspellings happen way too much. So what do we want to get from the table? Well, we want the data body range. That's everything except for the title and if you have a totals row, basically, or the header and totals row. So data body range, and then what do we want to get from it? Well, I want to get the rows with an S. That's going to break up that range into each one of the rows in the table. It is a great way to very easily go through this. And then we go next, RNG, cur row. All right. Now in here, we are going through all of the rows. What do we want to do? Well, we want to check if the previous value does not equal the current value. And we can use the RNG cur row as our reference, but that's the entire row. What do we want? We want a subset of it, so we use cells. And what do I want in there? I can say on the same row, so let's comma over to the column index argument, and I want to go for the third column, or the previous value column, and type dot value. And I want to see if it is a not equal to RNG cur row dot cells, comma to go to the column 4 for the current value, and I want to get the value from it, then and if. All right, so if we are here, then we have a new value for that cell. The current value does not equal the previous value. And back here in the table, we can see we have 4 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's why we compared dot cells with 3 for the column value to dot cells with 4 for the column value. And what do we want to do here? Well, we could do a million different things. What we're going to do is to build out our message box output. That's what we want to show the user. And then we're going to copy over the current value to the previous value column. What I am not going to do is to output a message box right here. Because if I do that, and then I have, let's say, 20 different cells that I'm going to track here, and they are all changed, then I'm going to get 20 message boxes. And it's going to be very annoying. So we're going to build the output or save the values right here, and then after the loop, do whatever we want with them. And that setup is so important when you do more powerful things than just output a message box. So let's go ahead and get some message box output right now. Message box output, we need to set it to itself so that we get the prefix in there. Message box output. And underscore to go to the next line. Let's tab in a little bit and make it so it's a little bit easier to read this as it might appear in the message box. And what I want to do is to output cur dot cells. I want to go for the worksheet where the change was made. So let's get the value from that guy. And let's go ahead and give it a tab, VB tab. It'll make it so everything lines up nicely. And underscore shift home to select that, control C to copy it, end to go to the end, enter to go to the next line, 1, 2, 3, and 2, 3, 4. And don't forget to remove that guy. But remember, we are in a loop. And the next time this loop runs, this is going to be attached to the next section of output. So we should also add a new line at the end of this, because this right here is just one single line. We need to get to the next line for the next input. So then what we're going to do, let's go ahead and add back the ampersand, the underscore, go to the next line, and do a VB new line right there. And now we have our message box good to go. Let's go ahead and copy the values over. And let's make life easy and do it like this. Range cur row dot cells column 3 dot value will now equal cur row dot cells the fourth column dot value. And those of you with a keen eye who work in really large data sets are now going to be saying, oh my good gosh, look at all those value references. Look at all the times you access the ranges in the workbook. That slows things down if you have massive data sets. And the first way to speed everything up when you're troubleshooting that is to make all of this an array. Now, I'm not going to cover that in this tutorial, but in my full VBA course, I have an entire section devoted to arrays, and they are really amazing things that you really should learn if you don't know how to use them. So to troubleshoot this guy for speed purposes, the first thing is turn it into an array. And now we are actually completely done with this loop, it looks like. So let's go below it and let us get the output message set up. So the code here is going to run every single time that we change a value in the entire workbook. And that's how it's set up so that we can track if a cell has changed due to a linked cell somewhere else changing. What that means is this guy is going to run a lot, and we set this up here before our loop, which means we're going to have something to show the user because we have a little prefix. So down here, we are going to do just a little simple check. If a message box output does not equal message box output prefix, then we have something to show the user. So we shall show them message box output. And we can close this guy up. And it is almost good. One little change I want to make. So I do love tabs, but let's go ahead and take this guy. So this is the previous value. This is the current value. And let's go like this. 1, 2, 3, space. Just so it looks a little better in the message box. and hit Alt F11 to go back here. Now, the moment I change anything in the workbook, the first time this runs, it's going to go through all of these and say they've all been changed because there's nothing in here for the previous value. So I can type a letter here, hit enter, and it would have run, except for I'm using the same workbook as before. And when I cleared the workbook, I had an error. So I'm going to skip ahead to the tip I was going to show you at the end, which is hit Control G to go to the immediate window, or go to View and Immediate Window. And what we can do here is control if the events are turned on or off. And that's going to allow you to test everything when you're building this macro and not have it run a million times. So you can turn off events. That means this guy's not going to run. And then when you're ready to make everything live, you can turn them back on. So we go down here to the immediate window and type application.enable events equals true and hit enter. And now our event should run just fine. So I input anything, hit enter, and there we go, the worksheets, the ranges, and the values that were changed. But since there was nothing in the previous value column, there's nothing right here. And notice these have all been copied over. These equal these. Let's go ahead and check. All right, the formulas have not been messed with. Everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and delete that now, which will run the macro again, but we shouldn't get any message box because we're not changing any of those numbers. Perfect. And we can go over here, input whatever you want. Nothing runs. Over here, change 5 to 7, enter. And there we go, the previous values and the new values. And now let's turn off the events to, let's say, test it further. Alt F11, Control G to go down here. Application.enable events equals false. Enter, Alt F11, and I can switch this guy to 10, and it's not going to run. Trust me, you are really going to want to turn events off until you're ready to have them used. And one little thing that you might actually want to do is you could have a cell somewhere here in the workbook or in your value tracker worksheet that acts as kind of a switch. And you could say enable events, or actually, how about this? Enable tracking. And it could say yes or no. And make that a named range, this guy right here, so it's a little bit easier to reference in your VBA code. And then what you can do, let's close the immediate window, is just enclose pretty much all of this within your if statement check that checks if you want to enable tracking or not. That way you can control it. You don't just have to always go in here to the immediate window and turn events off or on. You can control it for a specific event because you can have many events in your workbook, and you might not want to turn all of them off or all of them on. So a simple little if statement is going to help you out a lot with that. Now, that's all there is for this tutorial. Remember that you can download this file from teachexcel.com, and also if you want to learn how to do so much more, go ahead and take my full VBA course that'll take you from beginner to expert. I'm going to put a link to it below this video as well.